What if your DNA, like your actual genes, held the stories of empires rising and falling, or the marks left by huge migrations, even, the really dark parts of history?
Mhm.
Today we're doing a deep dive into something, well, it's incredibly complex and honestly, often really misunderstood. The German genome. And we're not talking about just one German gene. It's more like this intricate genetic quilt, right?
Yeah.
Stitched together over thousands of years through plagues and wars and massive historical changes. So the question is, what makes this genetic story stand out?
Yeah,
And why is it sometimes so controversial?
that's a great way to put it. Geneticists, historians too, they often see the German genome as one of the most studied, sure, but also one of the most debated in Europe. And it's precisely because it's so complex. What seems straightforward at first glance is actually this amazing convergence, this meeting point of deep history and, well, modern science. So we're going to try and unravel that together for you today, show you how it's much, much more layered than any simple label.
Okay, let's get into this genetic quilt then. When we talk about this sort of foundational layers, researchers often describe Germany as this genetic crossroads, like sitting right there in the heart of Europe, geographically, but genetically too,
Yeah.
where all these ancient paths met.
Exactly, that's spot on. Modern science, looking at the actual genetics, shows us that the German gene pool is really a mix of at least four major ancestral groups. Each one left a significant mark. So first, you've got the Western European hunter-gatherers. They were some of the earliest folks on the continent. Then you have the early European farmers migrating in from Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, basically. And they brought farming, yeah, but also new genes. After them, you get these waves of steppe herders, like the Yamnaya people, coming from the east, from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. They really changed the genetic makeup of Europe. And then on top of that, you have later layers. Think Romans, Slavic works moving in, Vikings, Jewish populations integrating over centuries. It's a lot.
Wow. Okay, so it's layer upon layer.
Precisely. And what's really striking, it's something for you to really think about, is this big genome mapping study from 2021. It found that modern Germans have, on average, about 60% ancestry from those Central European Neolithic farmers,
The 60%.
around 25% from the steppe herders,
Right.
and then smaller but still significant traces of Roman and even Middle Eastern DNA. So you see, this isn't just a vague idea. It's hard data showing that any concept of some kind of pure German lineage, well, it's just not supported by the science at all.
Okay, so it's not just these broad categories, but specific, sometimes surprising details woven in. What are some of those really interesting genetic signatures that pop up?
Ah, yes, this is where it gets really specific and I think quite fascinating for understanding this mix. So take the R1b haplogroup, for example.
R1b, what's that exactly?
Okay, so a haplogroup, basically it's like a major branch on the human family tree, traced through either the Y chromosome father to son or mitochondrial DNA mother to child. R1b is on the Y chromosome, and over 44% of German males carry this R1b haplogroup.
44%. That sounds like a lot.
It is. It's actually the most dominant Y DNA marker across Western Europe. And its high frequency in Germany really points to strong ancestral links with, say, Celtic and Italic peoples, including Romans, who spread across this region. But then, get this. In Bavaria and southern Germany, studies have found higher than average amounts of Neanderthal DNA.
Wait, Neanderthal DNA, seriously?
Seriously, up to 2.7% in some areas down south. Now, the European average is generally around 1.8 to 2.3%, so it's noticeably higher there.
Okay, hold on. So a little bit of our ancient cousins is like more concentrated in Bavaria. That's wild. What does that even mean?
Well, it's likely a deep echo from tens of thousands of years ago. It suggests that maybe in certain pockets, like southern Germany, the early modern humans migrating into Europe might have interbred a bit more with the Neanderthals who were already living there. It's not just a fun fact. It hints at really ancient population dynamics we're still figuring out.
Huh. Incredible.
And there's more. Another interesting marker involves the immune system. A 2019 biomedical study highlighted that Germany has one of the highest frequencies in Europe for a gene called HLA-B27.
HLA-B27.
Yeah, it's part of the HLA system, which helps your immune cells recognize invaders, like viruses or bacteria. Now, HLA-B27 is known to be linked to a higher risk for certain autoimmune diseases, like ankylosing spondylitis.
Okay, so that's not great.
Well, it's complex, because its high frequency also suggests it might have provided some kind of survival advantage in the past. Perhaps it helped fight off certain historical infectious diseases more effectively, even with the autoimmune risk. It points to unique evolutionary pressures shaping the immune system in that region.
These specific markers really do paint a picture of deep, complex history right inside people's cells. But We can't really talk about German genetics without, addressing the really difficult history, the misuse of these ideas. It's kind of the elephant in the room, or the genome, I guess.
Absolutely. And it's crucial to address it directly for you listening to understand the context.
Yeah.
The legacy of Nazi-era eugenics and their abhorrent racial science casts a long shadow. It's a terrible example of how science can be twisted for ideology. But, and this is really important for you to grasp, modern genetic science, with its precision, fundamentally debunks those dangerous myths.
So, with data.
Exactly, with overwhelming data. Modern studies show there's absolutely no such thing as a genetically pure German race. It just doesn't exist. Instead, what we see is huge internal diversity within Germany. You can see clear differences genetically between the North, which shows more influence from Anglo-Saxon and Viking groups, and the South, which has stronger Celtic and Roman mixing.
So diversity within Germany itself.
Massive diversity. And on top of that, you find measurable, widespread genetic markers from Jewish, Slavic, and Turkish populations, especially noticeable from migrations after World War II and more recent waves, too. And it's also worth pointing out that many German geneticists today are very active in public education, using open science to actively counter any attempts by extremist groups to misuse genetic narratives.
That's really vital work. So, okay, given this incredibly mixed genetic picture, it kind of begs the question people sometimes ask, does any of this genetic makeup explain those cultural traits sometimes associated with Germany? Like precision or discipline or innovation.
Right, that's a common question, but researchers are very clear on this point. There's no direct genetic link, no gene for intelligence, or specific national character traits. Those things are overwhelmingly shaped by culture, environment, history, education, not DNA directly.
Okay, so no orderliness gene.
Definitely not. However, there is this really interesting, though still developing and sometimes controversial field called epigenetics.
Epigenetics.
Yeah.
That's about how genes are expressed, right? Not the genes themselves.
Exactly. It's about how environmental factors, things like diet, stress, even major historical trauma can affect how your genes are switched on or off. It doesn't change the DNA code, but it can change how that code works, potentially even across generations.
Huh? No.
So while there's no gene for resilience, some researchers are exploring whether the intense stresses Germany experienced in the 20th century, 2 world wars, the country being divided, then reunified, could have left subtle epigenetic marks. These might, and I stress might, influence things like how populations respond to stress, maybe alertness or emotional regulation on a collective level. It's speculative, it's complex, but Germany's history makes it a really important, if sensitive place to study these potential long-term effects.
That idea of history leaving echoes, maybe even on our gene expression, that's pretty profound. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Thinking about today and the future, where does Germany, with this incredibly complex genetic story, fit into modern genetic medicine?
Oh, it plays a huge role now. It's actually become a major hub for genetic medicine and biomedical research.
How come?
Well, several reasons. Germany has pretty robust health record systems, large-scale biobanks are being built, and crucially, that regional genetic variation we talked about. It makes the population really valuable for studying complex diseases. Researchers there are doing vital work on rare genetic disorders, understanding how the immune system evolved, developing gene-based therapies for cancer, for autoimmune conditions. A great example for you is the German National Cohort, or NACO, N-A-K-O, Gesundheit study. It's massive, one of the biggest biobank projects in Europe, involving over 200,000 participants. They contribute health data, biological samples. It's a huge resource for research.
200,000 people, wow.
Yeah, and beyond studying diseases, Germany is also right at the forefront of exploring the ethical side of new technologies like CRISPR gene editing and advanced gene therapies. It shows a real focus not just on the past, but on responsibly shaping humanity's future through genetics.
So let's bring it back. After this whole deep dive, is there one single Germany gene? I think we've seen pretty clearly the answer is no. It's not some unique special strand of DNA. Instead, what we have is this incredible, deeply human story. It's written right there in the chromosomes of millions of people whose ancestors lived through empires, fragmentation, horrific persecution, and then reinvention again and again. It's absolutely not a story about purity. It's a story of complexity, of contradictions, but also amazing continuity.
Exactly. And just to recap those key takeaways for you listening, remember that high prevalence, over 44% of the R1b haplogroup in German men, points to those really strong Celtic and Roman roots across Western Europe. Don't forget the higher Neanderthal DNA in the South, up to 2.7%, that fascinating glimpse into our really deep human past.
Right.
And that high frequency of the HLA-B27 gene hinting at unique evolutionary pressures on the immune system over time. But the main point really is that modern science shows us there's no pure German genome. What there is an incredibly mixed, historically rich, and constantly evolving genetic tapestry.
Okay, so here's something maybe for you to think about after listening. Should national identity ever really be tied to genetics? Or maybe you've taken one of those DNA tests yourself. Did you find any ancestry results that completely surprised you, that didn't fit the story you thought you knew? Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about Germany. It's kind of about all of us, isn't it? It reflects the human story, one, of complexity, constant movement, shared heritage, and adaptation, all encoded in ourselves.